In the heart of an isolated monarchy, a residence was constructed at a scale no world leader had ever attempted. Almost 2,000 rooms, more than 2 million square feet, built as if limits themselves did not exist. Istana Nurul Iman, the world's largest private home, stands as the physical expression of absolute unchecked power. How does a palace of such magnitude come to exist, and what does its silence conceal about the state, the ruler, and the moment that made it possible? The answer begins far from the palace gates. On the southern banks of the Brunei River, a vast expanse of manicured parkland forms a silent barrier between city and palace. Istana Nurul Iman stands apart, its white walls and golden domes rising from a private domain that stretches for hundreds of acres, untouched by the rhythms of urban life. The palace is not woven into the city's fabric, nor does it share the crowded streets or markets of Bandar Seri Begawan. Instead, it occupies a promontory of land bordered on three sides by water, with the river itself serving as both moat and mirror. No ordinary roads run up to its gates. Instead, a network of controlled approaches winds through dense greenery and rolling hills, shielding the residents from direct view. The only public vantage lies across the water, where, on clear days, the palace's silhouette can be glimpsed from the distant Persiaran Damuan Park. Even then, the true scale remains elusive. Domes and arches seem to float above the tree line, their details blurred by distance and humidity. The river, once a thoroughfare for traders and fishermen, now marks a boundary few can cross. On one shore, the life of the capital continues, with schools, mosques, and markets threading through narrow streets. On the opposite shore, the palace's grounds extend in quiet and measured order, cut off from the city's noise by deliberate design. This separation is not accidental. The placement of Istana Nurul Iman on the river's edge, several kilometers south of the capital's center, ensures that the residence remains a world unto itself, visible, yet never truly accessible. Within its buffer of gardens and private parkland, the palace stands as a statement of isolation. The grounds are patrolled and carefully maintained, their boundaries marked by security posts rather than fences. The riverbank is landscaped to discourage approach, and the few ceremonial entrances are reserved for official occasions. For most of the year, the palace is seen only from afar, its presence dominating the landscape without inviting attention. In this way, the geography of Istana Nurul Iman serves not only to protect, but to define, a residence set apart, where distance itself becomes an expression of power. Brunei's population hovered near 400,000 at the time the palace was conceived, a small state by any measure, yet governed by authority of unusual concentration. At its center stood Sultan Hassan al-Bolkiah, who ascended the throne in 1967. His rule was not symbolic. The Sultan served as head of state, prime minister, minister of finance, and minister of defense, holding every primary lever of government within a single office. The Constitution, first enacted in 1959 and amended at independence, vested all executive, legislative, and judicial power in the Sultan alone. No parliament exercised oversight. The Legislative Council, dormant for decades, offered only advice when it met at all. Laws were issued by royal decree and published in the Government Gazette, requiring no debate or vote. In this system, the boundaries between ruler, government, and state dissolved. Ministries operated as direct extensions of the royal household. The palace itself was not only a residence, but the seat of government, containing the prime minister's office, the throne chamber, and all principal state function rooms. The Sultan presided over both religious and civil councils, appointing ministers, judges, and senior officials by personal command. Judicial authority rested with the ruler as well. Pardons, commutations, and legal judgments could be issued from the palace, with no independent court to countermand them. This form of governance, rooted in centuries of sultanate tradition, endured into the late 20th century without interruption. The brief experiment with limited self-government in the 1960s ended after a failed uprising, leaving the monarchy unchallenged. By the early 1980s, Brunei had become an absolute monarchy in the modern era, its institutions shaped to fit the will of a single figure. Political parties were absent. Civil society remained tightly circumscribed. The state's identity merged with that of its ruler, and the palace became the visible center of this fusion. Within such a structure, decisions of scaling and ambition face no internal check. The resources of the state could be marshaled at the Sultan's direction, unconstrained by opposition or public debate. As oil wealth accumulated, the possibility of building without limit became real. The palace's eventual scale, its thousands of rooms, its monumental halls, was not the result of necessity or competition, but of a system in which the ruler's authority was absolute and the state itself was self-contained. By the late 1970s, Brunei's fortunes were no longer tied to the slow commerce of river trade or the uncertain harvests of the land. Beneath the Sultanate's soil, oil reserves, first tapped in 1929, had begun to yield a bounty on a scale previously unimaginable. As global oil prices surged after 1973, Brunei's export revenues climbed sharply, swelling government coffers with each passing year. The world's energy crisis, felt as scarcity elsewhere, produced a sudden abundance here. In 1980, oil accounted for over 90% of Brunei's exports. By 1982, annual state revenues surpassed $2 billion, a sum extraordinary for a nation of fewer than 500,000 people. The government, under direct royal command, faced no external debt and little internal demand for restraint. The population remained small, and the needs of state administration were modest. The wealth generated by petroleum flowed directly to the treasury, accumulating in sovereign accounts and special reserves, with no parliamentary oversight and no requirement for public disclosure. The Sultan, holding the offices of Prime Minister, Finance Minister, and Monarch, guided every major allocation. There was no tradition of budgetary debate or competing priorities. The resources of the nation could be directed as the ruler saw fit. This moment of prosperity coincided with a period of global uncertainty. Oil prices, volatile and often rising, reinforced the sense that Brunei's window of opportunity might be brief. In neighboring countries, the benefits of resource wealth were diluted by population size and political contest. In Brunei, the absence of such constraints allowed for decisions of rare scale and ambition. The means to undertake projects beyond the reach of most states, whether in infrastructure, social provision, or architecture, were now available, and the authority to act was concentrated in a single office. Against this background, the idea of a new royal residence, one that would surpass all others in scale and permanence, became possible not as an act of necessity, but as an expression of unconstrained capability. The oil windfall of the late 1970s and early 1980s provided the financial foundation for a building without precedent, a structure conceived not in response to external pressure or domestic demand, but as a statement of what absolute wealth and authority could achieve when joined in a single hand. In 1981, the commission for a new royal residence was issued from the Sultan's office. The directive contained no reference to size, function, or cost. There was no prescribed limit, no architectural precedent to follow, and no external authority to consult. The project was to be the largest private residence ever constructed, a structure that would not merely house a ruler, but stand as a permanent emblem of his reign. The brief called for a palace that would surpass anything known to history, not as a matter of necessity, but as a demonstration of unrestrained capacity. The Office of Architectural Projects, operating under direct royal instruction, began the process of identifying a designer capable of translating this ambition into form. There was no public competition, no committee review, and no published criteria. The commission was not subject to the usual constraints of public procurement or governmental oversight. The Sultan's will alone defined the mandate. The palace would be built to embody permanence, scale, and authority, unconcerned with practicality or external opinion. The only requirement was that the building should reflect the stature and independence of the state at a moment of national transformation. The timing was deliberate. Brunei's independence from Britain was imminent, and the palace was to be completed in time for the proclamation of sovereignty. It would serve as both residence and seat of government, but these functions were secondary to its symbolic purpose. The structure itself was to be the statement, a declaration of what could be achieved when wealth and power were concentrated in a single figure. Within the commission, there was no mention of domestic comfort or administrative efficiency. The number of rooms, the size of the halls, the expanse of the grounds, these were left to the discretion of the architect, guided only by the expectation that the result would be without equal. The absence of limits was not an oversight, but the essence of the brief. It was understood that the palace should outlast its builder, standing as a monument to authority for generations. The project was not a response to need, but to possibility. In this, the commission for Istana Nurul Iman was unique, a mandate issued in an era of abundance, unrestricted by tradition or necessity, and executed in the name of permanence. Leandro V. Locsin, a Filipino architect known for his command of modernist forms, was entrusted with the task of giving shape to Brunei's new royal residence. The commission did not call for imitation, but for the creation of an architectural language that would reflect the Sultanate's identity at a moment of newfound sovereignty. Locsin's approach drew upon the traditions of Islamic and Malay architecture, yet he did not simply replicate historical motifs. Instead, he set out to fuse these elements with the principles of modern monumental design, producing a structure that would be both recognizably Bruneian and unmistakably contemporary. The palace's white massing and sweeping, vaulted roofs recall the vernacular forms of Malay houses, adapted here on a scale never seen before. The curved eaves, set high above the ground, echo the lifted timbers of kampong dwellings, while the repetition of arches and colonnades draws from Islamic patterns found throughout the region. Above these, golden domes rise in measured sequence, their surfaces clad in 22-karat gold leaf. The largest crowns the palace mosque, visible from great distance, signaling both spiritual and temporal authority. The minarets and domes are neither purely decorative nor strictly functional. They serve as emblems, connecting the residents to centuries of Islamic kingship, yet rendered here in the language of modern engineering. Locsin's modernism is evident in the clarity of the palace's geometry. The vast halls and corridors are organized along strict axes, with symmetry and repetition governing the layout. The use of reinforced concrete allows for spans and volumes that traditional timber or masonry could not support, translating the intimacy of Malay domestic forms into an architecture of command. The result is a building that is at once familiar and remote, rooted in local tradition, but scaled to the ambitions of a new era. For the interiors, the Sultan's office turned to Quan Chu, a designer recognized for her ability to marry opulence with discipline. Chu introduced Italian marble, Chinese granite, and intricate inlays of gold throughout the principal rooms. Her work does not merely decorate, it extends the palace's visual language, weaving Islamic arabesques and Malay motifs into ceilings, walls, and floors. The throne chamber, with its gilded surfaces and monumental proportions, stands as the ceremonial heart of the palace, while the private quarters maintain the same vocabulary of luxury and restraint. The architecture of Istana Nurul Iman is thus the product of collaboration, but also of synthesis. Locsin and Chu, working under a brief defined by possibility rather than limit, created a residence that draws upon Islamic, Malay, and European traditions, yet belongs fully to none. The palace's forms speak of faith, lineage, and sovereignty, but their scale and execution are those of the 20th century. In this, Istana Nurul Iman stands not as a replica of history, but as an artifact of a particular moment, when tradition and modernity were joined in the service of sovereignty. Construction of Istana Nurul Iman began in 1981, under a mandate that placed no explicit limit on size, cost, or complexity. The assignment fell to Ayala Abbott and Butters, a British firm, with Hagen International of Denmark, responsible for shop fitting. The project demanded a workforce of nearly 10,000, drawn from 17 countries. Recruitment extended across Asia, Europe, and the Middle East. Laborers, craftsmen, engineers, and supervisors arrived by ship and chartered plane, their numbers swelling the population of Bandar Seri Begawan for the duration of the build. The construction schedule was fixed at 27 months, an interval unusually brief for a project of such magnitude. Site preparation began with the clearing and grading of hundreds of acres along the Brunei River. Foundations were poured in parallel with the shipment of materials from overseas. Reinforced concrete formed the skeleton of the palace, its structural grid allowing for vast, column-free halls and sweeping vaulted roofs. The pace of work was relentless. Crews operated in shifts around the clock, pouring concrete, setting marble, and raising the white walls that would become the palace's outer shell. Materials were sourced on a global scale. 38 varieties of marble arrived from Italy, Spain, and Turkey. Chinese granite was selected for staircases and flooring. The palace's domes, including the great central dome crowning the mosque, were clad in 22-karat gold leaf, applied by specialist teams under controlled conditions. Timber for paneling and joinery was imported from Southeast Asia, while glass and decorative fittings came from Europe. Shipments arrived at the port of Muara, then traveled upriver or by road to the construction site. Logistics required the creation of temporary roads, storage yards, and worker camps, all managed as part of a single, coordinated operation. The sheer volume of work defied ordinary benchmarks. At the height of construction, more than 100 subcontractors worked simultaneously on different wings of the palace. The installation of electrical and mechanical systems kept pace with the rising structure, as did the fitting of air conditioning, plumbing, and security infrastructure. Interior finishing teams followed close behind, laying marble, fitting mosaics, and installing carved doors. The throne chamber, banquet hall, and mosque each demanded their own sequence of specialized trades. In the final months, the focus shifted to landscaping, with imported trees and plants arranged to create the palace's buffer of gardens and parkland. By the close of 1983, the palace neared completion. The last of the scaffolding was removed, and the gold domes were burnished to a high sheen. The workforce, having delivered a residence of 1,788 rooms and over 2 million square feet, began to disperse. The task had been executed with a speed and scale rarely matched in modern construction, a process shaped by the absence of external constraint and the presence of nearly limitless resources. Measured in absolute terms, Istana Nurul Iman stands alone. Its floor area exceeds 2.15 million square feet, a figure that resists easy comprehension. The palace contains 1,788 rooms, including 257 bathrooms, arranged across a footprint that stretches for more than 200,000 square meters. By comparison, the Palace of Versailles, often cited as the epitome of royal grandeur, encompasses approximately 721,000 square feet. Buckingham Palace, the official residence of the British monarch, covers just over 830,000 square feet and contains 775 rooms. The White House, seat of the American presidency, occupies a mere 55,000 square feet with 132 rooms. No other private residence approaches the dimensions recorded at Istana Nurul Iman. This is not a complex of separate buildings, but a single, continuous structure. The entire palace is unified under one roof, its volumes linked by corridors that extend for hundreds of meters. The room count alone is without precedent, but it is the scale of individual spaces that distinguishes the building further. Banquet halls capable of seating 5,000 guests, a mosque for 1,500 worshippers, and stables for over 200 polo ponies are contained within the same perimeter. The palace is not measured in wings or annexes, but in uninterrupted expanse. The numbers, though precise, cannot fully convey the experience of space. At Istana Nurul Iman, distance is felt in the time required to traverse a single corridor or in the echo that lingers in a marble hall. The building's dimensions were not dictated by function or necessity, but by an idea of residence that required no external reference. In the history of architecture, palaces have often sought to impress through size. Yet here, the measurement itself becomes the message. The scale of Istana Nurul Iman, recorded in official registers and verified by international bodies, stands as a fact that requires no embellishment. The experience of space within Istana Nurul Iman is defined by distance. Corridors extend for 30 meters at a time, their marble floors unbroken by ornament or interruption. The principal hall, 100 meters in length, recedes into silence, its vaulted ceiling supported by a rhythm of columns that repeat at measured intervals. The scale is not accidental. Each passage, each threshold, is calculated to separate rather than to connect, establishing a hierarchy that places the private apartments far from the ceremonial core. On the upper floors, suites reserved for the royal family are set back behind layers of processional space, reached only after a sequence of controlled crossings, anterooms, waiting halls, guarded vestibules. The arrangement is not domestic in any ordinary sense. There are no visible signs of daily life, no concessions to comfort or informality. Even in the residential wings, the dimensions remain monumental. Apartments are arrayed along galleries that overlook interior courtyards, their doors set wide apart. The effect is one of deliberate detachment. Sound is absorbed by thick walls and high ceilings. Footsteps echo briefly and then disappear. In this architecture, proximity is rationed and intimacy is withheld. The palace's formal distance is reinforced by the absence of familiar scale. Furniture is dwarfed by the surrounding volume. Light enters through clerestory windows set high above eye level. The journey from entrance to be an audience chamber, or from private quarters to State Hall, is measured in minutes rather than moments. The structure does not invite occupation, it requires traversal. Every element, from the width of the corridors to the height of the doors, is designed to remind the visitor of their position within a larger order. Here, the architecture enforces separation, not only between ruler and subject, but between the idea of residence and the experience of home. Endurance was not left to chance. The structure of Istana Nurul Iman rests upon foundations driven 30 meters into the riverbank and underlying rock, a depth chosen to withstand the shifting soils of Brunei's floodplain. Reinforced concrete forms the core of the palace, its mass stabilized by a grid of steel beams, certified for a lifespan of at least 100 years. The steel, imported under strict specification, was selected for its resistance to both tropical humidity and the slow corrosion brought by proximity to the river. Every load-bearing wall, each column and arch, was calculated not only to support the immediate weight of marble, gold, and stone, but to endure the silent pressures of time and climate. Unlike palaces that grow by accretion, wings added, annexes appended as dynasties change, Istana Nurul Iman was conceived as a finished whole. The design contains no provision for future expansion, no allowance for adaptation or subdivision. Each room, each corridor, is set in its final relationship to the others, the plan locked from the moment of completion. The palace's envelope, nearly half a kilometer in length, is continuous and unbroken, its volume sealed against the encroachment of the outside world. The result is an architecture that resists both decay and revision, built to outlast its original function and the generation that commissioned it. This insistence on permanence is evident in the choice of materials. Marble, drawn from quarries in Italy, Spain, and Turkey, lines the principal halls and staircases, its surfaces polished to reflect the passing of decades rather than years. Timber, selected for density and grain, was treated to withstand the region's heat and moisture. Even the gold leaf that gilds the domes was applied in layers thick enough to resist the slow abrasion of tropical rain. In these specifications, the intention is clear. Istana Nurul Iman was not built for the present alone, but for a future in which its scale and solidity would continue to assert the authority of its origins. Access to Istana Nurul Iman is governed by absence. The palace remains closed to the public throughout the year, its grounds shielded by a perimeter that extends 500 meters in every direction. This boundary is not marked by walls or fences, but by the silent presence of guards stationed at intervals, maintaining a watch that does not waver, day or night. The approach roads are blocked by security posts, and the riverbanks are patrolled with equal care, ensuring that no unauthorized visitor draws near. For 3 days each year, during the festival of Hari Raya Idul Fitri, the palace gates are open to the public. These brief intervals are carefully managed. Entry is permitted only within strict limits, and visitors are confined to ceremonial halls under constant supervision. Photography is restricted, and movement is channeled along predetermined routes. Beyond these rare occasions, the palace recedes once again into silence, its interiors unseen, and its daily rhythms concealed from view. The rules governing access extend to the airspace above, and the media coverage permitted. Aerial photography is prohibited, and images distributed to the public are selected by the royal household. Even from a distance, the palace's silhouette is all that is offered. The effect is deliberate. The residence exists as a presence rather than a destination. Its scale and grandeur communicated through what is withheld as much as by what is revealed. In Brunei, the seat of power is defined not by spectacle, but by its own inaccessibility. On the first day of January 1984, as Brunei declared its independence, the palace stood ready. The inauguration unfolded without spectacle, its ceremony defined by restraint. Officials gathered in the principal hall, where the Sultan received the instruments of sovereignty beneath the central dome. The air was heavy with formality. No crowds pressed against the gates. The event was not broadcast beyond what protocol required. Within the marble corridors, the new state's symbols were presented: the royal regalia, the constitution, the proclamation of independence. The Sultan, now absolute in authority, accepted these tokens in a setting that dwarfed all present. The halls, designed for thousands, absorbed the voices of a few hundred dignitaries and envoys. The scale of the palace, so recently completed, offered no intimacy, only distance. Outside, the city remained quiet. No public procession crossed the river. No festival spilled onto the palace grounds. The inauguration was an act of closure as much as of opening. The palace, finished in time for this moment, became the seat of a sovereign state. Yet its vastness offered no explanation. Official silence by design. Why would the world's largest residence choose erasure over spectacle? What happens when a building this grand is meant to be seen by almost no one? The real story begins after the gates are shut. On the first day after completion, the palace stood quiet. Construction crews departed, leaving behind a structure intended to last beyond a single lifetime. The date was January 1st, 1984. Brunei had just marked its independence. The palace, finished to the day, was not open to the public. No ceremonies announced its readiness. There were no crowds, no invitations, no public procession through marble halls. Instead, the gates closed and the building turned inward. A single family entered the residence. Sultan Hassanal Bolkiah, newly sovereign, became the sole occupant of a space measured in millions of square feet. The world's largest private home was now inhabited, but not revealed. Its 1,788 rooms, 257 bathrooms, and gold-plated domes became part of daily life for a handful of people. The exterior, visible from the river and distant hills, offered no sign of activity inside. The palace's official function as a seat of government did not translate into public access. Documents from the period record the completion, but not the life that followed. No journalists were granted tours. No foreign dignitaries walked the corridors in those first months. The story of occupation was written in silence. The building's scale, so often cited in records, quickly faded into background. What remained was the absence of movement, the absence of noise. Marble floors, polished but untouched, reflected the light from chandeliers that hung above empty halls. Banquet rooms designed for thousands remained unused. The mosque, built to hold 1,500 worshippers, echoed with footsteps instead of prayer. The air inside was still, punctuated only by the distant hum of climate systems, keeping the tropical heat at bay. No images from the early days have surfaced. Official photographs show the palace as an object, never as a place inhabited. The absence is not accidental. The design called for privacy, for separation, for the erasure of daily life from the public record. The palace became a seal world at the moment of its completion, a residence without a public face, a monument to sovereignty that required no audience. From the first day, the palace's story became one of withdrawal rather than celebration. Its presence was established not through spectacle, but through distance. The structure, finished and occupied, receded from view. The silence that followed was not the result of neglect, but of intention. The world's largest residence began its existence not as a stage, but as a boundary, a line drawn between the private and the public, enforced by architecture and by choice. The palace stands behind a river and a line of guarded gates. No signs point the way. There are no ticket offices, no waiting lines, and no maps for visitors. The structure is known by record books and distant observation, not by first-hand account. Policies governing the palace are simple and absolute. There are no public tours. The doors remain closed to tourists, students, and journalists alike. The grounds are not open for wandering, and the interior is not available for study. Official imagery is limited to a few carefully chosen photographs, released at intervals and always controlled. These images show polished marble, golden domes, and empty halls, but never the rhythms of daily life. The rules around documentation are strict. Photography is not permitted beyond what the palace itself releases. No independent cameras have recorded the private wings, the ceremonial halls, or the service corridors. The absence of images is not an oversight. It is a condition maintained by law and by custom. The palace is visible from the water, its silhouette rising above the trees, but what lies beyond the walls remains unrecorded. The golden domes reflect the sun, but the windows do not reveal what is inside. There is no tourism economy built around the palace. No guided access, no souvenir shops, no official narratives for outsiders to follow. The building is not promoted as a destination. Its story is not told through pamphlets or exhibitions. The only accounts that circulate are official statements and rare glimpses released during national celebrations. Even then, access is limited to certain halls and only for a short period. The majority of rooms remain unseen, their purpose unspoken. Distance is not accidental. The boundaries are enforced by policy and by presence. Guards are stationed at the perimeter, and security systems monitor the approach. The absence of crowds is not the result of neglect, but of design. The palace was built to be occupied, not displayed. Its scale is measured in square feet, but its presence is measured in silence. The result is a structure that exists as fact, but not as experience. It is known by its statistics, not by its stories. The world's largest residence is rarely photographed, rarely described, and almost never entered by those outside its walls. The building's withdrawal from view is not temporary. It is the enduring state of its existence. In this, the palace is not simply hidden. It is made invisible by choice. Inside the palace, numbers replace stories. There are 1,788 rooms, each accounted for in official records but rarely described. The corridors stretch for hundreds of meters, linking chambers that remain unnamed. With 257 bathrooms, the building offers more facilities than most hotels, distributed across a footprint of over 2 million square feet. The rooms are not gathered around a central courtyard or arranged for easy movement. Instead, they are separated by deliberate distances, with suites, halls, and antechambers, forming a network of spaces that few have ever traversed in full. A banquet hall at the heart of the palace can accommodate up to 5,000 guests. This room is designed for ceremonies that occur only a handful of times each year. Its size rivals that of a convention center, yet it remains silent for most days, the tables empty and the chandeliers unlit. A mosque within the palace allows for 1,500 worshippers, but daily prayers do not fill its vastness. The scale of these spaces is measured not by their use, but by their capacity. The numbers extend beyond the visible. There are garages built to hold over 100 vehicles, kitchens capable of preparing thousands of meals at once, and storage rooms whose contents are not listed in any public inventory. The architecture anticipates a level of activity that rarely arrives. Each room, each hall, is a possibility rather than a certainty, a space created in expectation of events that seldom occur. No single person can know the building in its entirety. The distances between rooms, the repetition of doors and corridors, make orientation difficult even for those who live within its walls. The palace is not organized for convenience or intimacy. Its layout resists familiarity. The numbers, rooms, bathrooms, seats suggest abundance, but also a kind of absence. Each statistic marks another boundary between the interior and the outside world, between what is recorded and what is experienced. Inside the palace, materials were chosen for their permanence and for their ability to mute the passage of time. Marble, brought from Italy, lines the floors and walls, its surface cool and reflective, patterned with veins that run like distant rivers. The stone absorbs sound and light in equal measure, softening footsteps and casting a pale glow even when the halls remain unlit. Persian carpets, woven by hand, stretch across reception rooms and private chambers. Their patterns echo motifs found in Brunei's Islamic and Malay traditions, linking imported luxury to local meaning. These carpets do not wear quickly. Their fibers are dense, their colors deep, their presence intended to outlast those who walk upon them. Above, chandelier of cut crystal hang in measured intervals. Each one is assembled from hundreds of individual pieces, refracting light into quiet rainbows that move across the ceilings. The effect is not one of spectacle, but of controlled radiance, a steady shimmer rather than a burst. In ceremonial halls, the ceilings rise far above eye level. Gold leaf is applied in thin layers to domes and cornices, catching sunlight that enters through narrow windows. The gold does not tarnish. It reflects, but does not reveal. The designer, known for uniting regional and religious forms, gave the palace a vocabulary that is both familiar and remote. Arches recall mosques across the Islamic world, while the proportions of the main halls reference Malay palaces of earlier centuries. Yet, the scale is without precedent. Details are repeated at a magnitude that makes them almost abstract. One column becomes a forest, one arch a procession. The intention was not comfort, but continuity. Each material, each surface, was selected to enforce separation and to resist change. The result is a world where luxury is measured not by ornament, but by endurance. Marble, gold, and crystal do not invite touch. They withstand it. The palace is not a collection of rooms, but a system of surfaces designed to hold silence. In this, the materials serve as both decoration and barrier, preserving distance, absorbing sound, and leaving little trace of those who pass through. Corridors inside the palace run straight for hundreds of meters, unbroken by turns or gathering points. Each wing, each suite, is set apart by deliberate space, not by accident or oversight. The logic of the building is one of separation. Paths between rooms are measured in minutes, not steps. The distance from a private chamber to a reception hall is not a matter of convenience, but of intention. Movement inside the palace does not follow the patterns of an ordinary home. There are no shortcuts, no central hubs where life converges. Instead, the structure divides itself into zones, each insulated by length and by silence. Service corridors run parallel to ceremonial halls, never intersecting except at controlled thresholds. Even routine tasks, delivering a message, bringing a tray, require plan. The layout resists instinct. Routes are chosen, not stumbled upon. Doors open onto wide galleries, often empty, their scale reducing the presence of anyone who passes through. The act of crossing from one side of the palace to the other becomes a journey, not a simple transition. This engineered distance shapes daily life in ways that are rarely visible. Encounters do not happen by chance. Proximity is never unplanned. The building ensures that every meeting, every movement, is separated by space and by time. The effect is not only physical, but psychological. The mind adjusts to the expectation of distance. Voices do not carry. Footsteps fade before reaching the next chamber. The absence of crowding is not a luxury, but a condition. In this environment, the architecture itself becomes an organizing force, setting the terms of interaction and solitude. The palace is not a container for life, but a landscape to be navigated. Its distances are not obstacles to be overcome, but features to be inhabited. The logic of separation is built into every corridor, every threshold, every silent stretch of marble floor. Schedules govern the flow of daily life inside the palace. Each movement from one wing to another must be considered in advance. The distance from a private suite to a reception hall is measured not in footsteps, but in minutes. Elevators, built to serve specific zones, are programmed to arrive at set intervals. A journey from the family quarters to the mosque or to a formal office is not a matter of simple direction, but of coordination. An elevator summoned, a corridor chosen, a door unlocked at the right moment. These routines are mapped, not improvised. Deliveries and services follow timetables that rarely change. Supplies arrive at designated entrances, their arrival anticipated by staff who track each delivery against a master schedule. Food prepared in distant kitchens is transported by cart along service corridors. the route planned to avoid crossing paths with residents. Even the act of bringing a tray of tea or a document requires knowledge of the building's rhythms. Timing is essential. A miscalculation can mean a delay of several minutes, or a missed appointment altogether. Geography of the palace demands forethought. To reach the far end of a wing, one must account for locked doors, restricted passageways, and the need to traverse galleries that may be empty for hours at a time. The absence of shortcuts enforces a kind of discipline. No one moves without purpose. The architecture eliminates chance encounters, replacing them with scheduled meetings and arranged crossings. The building's size dictates the pace of life within it. Routine is shaped by necessity. Each morning, the day's movements are reviewed. Who will occupy which rooms, which halls must be prepared, which elevators will be in use. The logistics are invisible to those who inhabit the private chambers, but essential to the functioning of the palace. Service routes run parallel to ceremonial paths, each mapped to avoid overlap. The result is a world where movement is planned in advance, and the friction of scale is felt in every step. The palace does not allow for spontaneity. It requires orchestration, turning daily life into a sequence of mapped routines. A palace of this scale cannot function on silence alone. Behind the closed doors, a human system operates, rarely seen, seldom acknowledged. Oversight falls to a director whose name is not widely known, responsible for the invisible lattice that keeps the building alive. Service is organized as a network rather than a household. Hundreds of staff move through the corridors, each with a defined route and a fixed task. Their presence is measured, their voice is kept low. The palace is divided not only by marble and gold, but by a hierarchy that separates those who serve from those who are served. Most staff enter through service gates far from the main entrance. Uniforms are issued, routines memorized. Each person is assigned to a zone: kitchens, laundry, maintenance, ceremonial halls. Few cross from one zone to another. Instructions travel down the chain, rarely in person. Orders are relayed through intermediaries, notes, or the silent language of routine. There are no chance meetings in the corridors. The architecture ensures that service and residence remain apart, their paths designed never to cross except by necessity. The director's office is not at the heart of the palace, but at its edge, close to the service wings, far from the ceremonial halls. From here, schedules are set, supplies are ordered, and problems are solved before they reach the main residence. The staff's work is to erase evidence of their own activity. Surfaces are polished, linens replaced, meals delivered and removed, all without drawing notice. The goal is not efficiency, but invisibility. To remain unseen is to succeed. Staff operate in shifts, day and night. Some never see the family whose home they maintain. Most will not enter the grand halls except to clean or prepare for a rare event. Their daily routes are mapped to avoid the main corridors, using back stairs and service elevators that do not open onto public rooms. The organization is precise, the hierarchy enforced not by supervision, but by the architecture itself. The palace is kept in order by a workforce whose presence is felt only in the absence of disorder. Their labor is the foundation of the silence that defines the building. Sound inside Istana Nurul Iman is measured not in echoes, but in their absence. Marble, chosen for its endurance, dampens footsteps before they can travel. Doors close with a weight that absorbs vibration rather than sending it down the corridor. Even the largest halls, intended for thousands, remain hushed when empty. The air is thick with quiet, an atmosphere shaped as much by material as by intention. In such a structure, ordinary noise does not accumulate. Conversation fades quickly, swallowed by distance and by the density of walls. A single voice in a gallery becomes a private matter, never reaching the next room. The scale of the palace does not amplify sound, it erases it. High ceilings, heavy carpets, and layered drapery soften what little noise is made, turning activity into suggestion rather than announcement. There are no crowds to generate a background hum, no steady rhythm of footsteps, no clatter of daily life. Instead, there is a persistent silence, broken only by the mechanical sigh of air systems or the distant click of a latch. Those who have crossed these interiors speak of a sensation both physical and psychological. The vastness does not invite speech. Instead, it encourages restraint. The human voice seems out of place, reduced in scale by the volume of the room. Even the act of walking, heel striking marble, fabric brushing against stone, feels amplified in the mind but diminished in the ear. In interviews, visiting dignitaries recall the strangeness of their own presence, as if the building itself resisted occupation. The palace does not echo with life. It absorbs it, leaving only the memory of movement behind. This quiet is not accidental. The architecture is designed to hold silence. Each surface, each stretch of empty floor is a buffer against intrusion. The effect is cumulative. Over time, the lack of sound becomes its own kind of presence. The building enforces solitude, not through isolation alone, but through the persistent absence of noise. In this environment, even maintenance, polishing, cleaning, repair must be performed quietly, so as not to disturb the prevailing hush. The silence is both a condition and a command, shaping the experience of everyone within its walls. Air moves through the palace in measured currents, controlled by machinery that never sleeps. Deep inside the walls, a network of ducts and silent fans circulates cooled air from one end of the building to the other. The climate outside is unchanging, humid, dense, and hot, while inside, temperature and humidity are kept within strict limits. The marble floors, stretching for hundreds of meters, draw in the night's chill and the day's warmth, demanding constant adjustment. Beneath the surface, technical crews monitor gauges and sensors. Chiller plants, hidden from view, supply cold water to fan coils scattered across 2.1 million square feet. Each wing operates as its own zone, with controls set for private chambers, ceremonial halls, and service corridors. Air handlers run quietly behind locked doors, their hum lost in the thickness of stone and carpet. The system is not designed for comfort alone, but for preservation. Marble, gold, and crystal require stable conditions to avoid damage from Brunei's tropical air. Maintenance is a cycle without end. Teams move in shifts, day and night, inspecting filters, replacing seals, and testing alarms. Pools and fountains demand their own routines, water treated, levels checked, pumps maintained against the slow creep of algae and corrosion. Kitchens, garages, and stables each present their own needs, their climate controlled separately from the main residence. The staff who carry out this work are rarely seen. Their routes are mapped to avoid the main corridors. Supplies are delivered through service entrances, equipment stored in rooms never shown in official photographs. Orders come from a director whose office sits at the edge of the palace, closer to the machinery than to the throne room. Schedules are set weeks in advance. Every system is logged, every inspection recorded, every repair anticipated before failure. The technical demands of the palace are not a matter of luxury, but of necessity. Without constant attention, the building would surrender to the climate, marble would sweat, gold would tarnish, carpets would fade. The silence that defines the palace is not a natural state. It is maintained hour by hour by a workforce whose presence is measured in the absence of breakdowns. The world's largest residence endures not through spectacle, but through the ceaseless labor of those who keep it running, unseen and unnamed. The cost of Istana Nurul Iman is recorded in official accounts as between 1 and 1.4 billion US dollars. No public debate, no budget hearings, and no published justifications accompanied this sum. The palace rose in a single act of will, its purpose unquestioned, its scale unchallenged. In the decades since completion, no other private residence has approached its magnitude. There are no successors, no rival projects, no architects proposing something larger. The building stands as a singular point in architectural history, a monument that did not invite imitation. For a brief period after 1984, the palace drew attention as a marvel of size and expense. International headlines listed its statistics. The world's largest residential palace, more rooms than a city block, a cost that surpassed the budgets of entire nations. The Guinness Book of Records entered its name, yet, as the years passed, the attention faded. The palace did not become a symbol in the manner of Versailles or Buckingham Palace. It did not inspire a tradition of monumental private homes. Instead, it receded from the world's view, its vastness referenced only in passing, its story left largely untold. The world around the palace changed. Architectural trends shifted toward efficiency, transparency, and public engagement. Minimalist homes and open plans replaced the logic of sealed compounds and endless corridors. Even among the world's wealthy, the appetite for private monumental architecture diminished. No new palaces of this scale have been built since. The era of constructing such singular residences quietly closed, leaving Istana Nurul Iman as both culmination and anomaly. Today, the palace occupies little space in public discourse. News stories rarely mention it. Academic studies seldom examine its design or its consequences. Photographs remain scarce, and official statements are limited to ceremonial occasions. The structure endures, but the spotlight has moved elsewhere. Its presence is measured not by influence or imitation, but by its own continued existence, unchanged, unchallenged, and largely unobserved. Istana Nurul Iman stands as a monument in stasis. Its cost is a matter of record, its scale unmatched, its relevance to the present uncertain. The building remains not as a model for the future, but as the endpoint of a particular vision of wealth, one that required neither explanation nor approval, and which now persists in silence. Today, Istana Nurul Iman endures as a private world, 2.15 million square feet, largely uninhabited, rarely seen. While modern architecture moves toward transparency and efficiency, this palace remains a monument to separation and silence. Its scale no longer signals progress, but distance, between ruler and ruled, between past and present. In a world obsessed with visibility, here, invisibility is the legacy. Thank you for watching.